This screencast, the third in the series on Butterworth's Jerusalem, looks briefly at some of the contexts of the writing and the reception of the play. This is part of the new AS and A2 assessment objectives, which require, as always, a much closer look at contextual factors than ever is encountered at IGCSE or GCSE level. So the play was first performed in 2009, transferred to the West End in 2010, was triumphant on Broadway in 2011 before returning to the West End also in 2011. And the play as a whole through this sequence is absolutely indivisible from the actor who played Rooster Byron, Mark Rylance, who has become in recent years widely regarded as one of the finest actors ever to have appeared in the history of theatre in this country. There's a link here on the original PowerPoint to an interview with him, and on the John Lyon School English Department YouTube channel there are several YouTube clips relating to Rylance and this play. Consequently, because he created the character and because he is identified so strongly with the play in performance at this time, it's been very little, if at all, performed on a professional stage other than in this form, then we have to be aware that his thoughts on the character are totally valid and totally part of any discussion that you might be having in school about the play. The play was a success, although it was a success in 2009 that was not necessarily universal. The language of the play, the apparent triumphal portrayal of this traveller character was not something that achieved universal acclaim. However, by the time it returned to London in 2011, after travelling to New York, where it was greeted with huge plaudits, it had become almost a sort of legendary play of our time. It became one of the hottest tickets in the capital. And it's interesting just to see what began to happen around this time in the country. This is a play which asks us to look at what it means to be English. August 2011 saw riots in many major English towns. October saw the beginning of the Occupy movement, which tried to occupy the Stock Exchange, failed, and led to the eventual occupation of the St Paul's Cathedral area, which wasn't removed until February 2012, when bailiffs and the police were eventually brought in. These were all anti-capitalist movements. They were all protests against, well, a world that was putting profit ahead of all else. Also, at this time, in October 2011, there was a very high-profile eviction of the Dale Farm Travellers, essentially a small town of travelling people who had set up on land since 2011 and who were ultimately forcibly ejected following complaints from local people and so forth. With this happening at the time, suddenly the play begins to look terribly prescient. And we might want to think, as we're reading, and this is scope for a discussion in class, I think, of how this play might be seen as being quite so prescient. And this is really what we call the context of reception. In 2009, when the play was created, the conditions for 2011 existed, but weren't so stark, if you like. We talked in, I think it's the first screencast, about the ideas of the post-pastoral, the idea that as our consciousness awakes, thus our consciences also awake. And again, we need to think about this play in that light now very, very strongly. What messages does this play give us that pricks our conscience in a certain way? The play is set in Wiltshire, in a fictional village, though it's based on Pusey. And Wiltshire somehow begins to represent sort of everywhere, if you like, in the country. It is ostensibly a very rural country. I'm a proud Wiltshireman, but I am prepared to accept that Wiltshire has no real impact on the rest of the country at all, apart from the fact that it contains Stonehenge, Avebury and other ancient sites, which is important in a play that spends so much time looking at the pagan at a time before. I wonder whether, with our post-pastoral hat on, if we read Wiltshire as a synecdoche for the UK, then can we extend the council destruction of the forest to wider aspects such as deforestation of the whole planet in search for profit? Again, these are questions that this play has to allow us to explore. There's a sense, therefore, that there is a tension set up between modernity, seen here in the forces of the council and money and so on, and the past. The Englishman's home is his castle. Now, if that is true, then Johnny has every right to defend it and defend it and defend it. Yet, this is a play that looks at change. Butterworth himself has said that. There's an interesting dichotomy in that Rooster is absolutely desperate to stay in this place, but is forced to leave it, and Lee, one of his satires, is desperate to leave, to go to Australia, but actually keeps on trying to stay and always being forced to stay, and there is a sort of cyclical balance in terms of this that helps us and proceed with our studies through the play. It's difficult then in terms of the context to see why this play was quite so successful. I mean, it is a fantastically written play, and the speeches, particularly the big curses and invocations of Rooster, are as powerful as anything written by Shakespeare. Rylance talks of the play being full of wildness and defiance, which again makes it very appropriate, perhaps, in 2011. Andrew Marr, a BBC commentator, and there are links to his articles on my blog, declares that in an infantilised culture, the mature and challenging nature of the play came like rain after a drought, and he comments on the culture that exists today of immediate satisfaction, of gratification at the push of a button, of dumbed down television, of a lifestyle that is soft. There's no other word for it in our country. That the challenge of those preconceptions and the challenge, if you like, of our complacency is something that is vital when we read this play. It's set, part of the setting as well, on St. George's Day, and I will talk about that at length later when we discuss dragons and dragon killers. The day has become a celebration of Englishness, but what is English? And which of these central ideas is English? The outsider defending his castle, or the authorities wanting to cleanse and profiteer? We have to think about what nature of Englishness this play presents. We need to consider who is the dragon on St. George's Day. Is it the individual or is it the state? Thank you for listening. I hope this one has been useful, as I hope the others are, and I wish you the best of luck.